Hello and welcome to Improve Your Financial Score. My name is Marty Johannes and I'm the Careers and Personal Finance Librarian for the Johnson County Library. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to start off by asking you a few polling questions. And your responses to these questions enable us to better develop and to better promote programs for and to our community. So the first polling question is, how did you hear about this program? Please select all that apply. And you may need to scroll down to see the very last one. So the first one is the JCL website and the last option is other. Okay. And then the next poll is which topic? I'll go ahead and share those results so you can see that. And then the next poll is, let me get back to that. Which topics would you like for Johnson County Library to offer future programs on? And again, select all that apply. So your first option is resumes and cover letters, and your last option is senior housing options. So please select any that you would like to see. Okay. I'll give you another 30 seconds. Okay. Okay, so those are the results. And you're in luck because we do have a senior housing options program that we'll be offering in November. Although registration for the in-person program is full, we are going to be recording it and we're going to be offering that same program, senior housing options, again in the spring, along with a program on wills and powers of attorney. Okay. So now on to our presenter. We are fortunate tonight to have Emerson Hartzler presenting for us. And before I turn the program over to Emerson, I want to tell you a little bit about him. Emerson has had a very distinguished career. He served as the director of the Management Consulting Division for Touche Ross, the Vice President of New Product Development for Retirement Centers of America, and as the Executive Director of Cardiovascular Consultants. He holds a bachelor degree in industrial administration from KU and an MBA with an emphasis in finance from the University of Iowa. And when Emerson retired, and I put that in quotation marks, in 2007, he pursued a new career as a pro bono financial advisor. He assumed the role of Director of Pro Bono Services for Triune Financial Partners for 8 years until 2015. And he continues to maintain an independent pro bono financial practice. Since 2007, he has served over 350 individuals and families in the community, doing all of his work on a pro bono basis, in other words, without charge. Much of Emerson's work with clients involves helping them to plan and manage their income and expenses on a monthly basis so that over time they can achieve financial success. Emerson's contact information will be provided at the end of the presentation for those of you who are interested in scheduling a one-on-one appointment with Emerson to establish your own benefits, and your own spending and savings plan. Emerson has presented 2 other programs for the Johnson County Library community, Exposing the Myths of Retirement Investing, a 3-part series, and 21st Century Budgeting with Mint.com. Recordings of these programs can be accessed on the Personal Finance Online Programs Archive and also on the Johnson County Library YouTube channel. During the presentation, as questions come to mind, please enter them in the chat box. We'll have Q&A at the end of the presentation. And now I'll turn the program over to Emerson.
All right, thanks very much. I'm going to share the screen I have. Hopefully you can all see that. In my practice over the last 14 years, I've talked to a lot of people, and this presentation is a little bit of a reaction to the thoughts that I get many times about, how well are you doing? Well, people tend to know and focus on their credit score. And that's very important to a lot of people. It's not very important to me, and I'll give you the reasons why in this presentation. But people are kind of fixated on that, thinking their credit score is a good measure of their financial health. And in some cases it is, but not necessarily. In some cases, it's really a poor indicator of financial health. So what is an indication of financial health? And I've termed the term a financial score. So I want to know what my financial score is. How am I really doing, and how do I measure that? Now, any business will measure their financial health usually by a net worth statement. So you'll see monthly, annual statements in any business that track their net worth. How are they growing their net worth, their overall worth? And they do that on a balance sheet. So I'm going to show you a sample of a client balance sheet or financial score. And let me make this as big as I can. See. That's too big. That's perfect. All right, so this is really a very simple chart. This is a little Excel spreadsheet that I use, but what it does is track your net worth or your financial score over time. Now, again, I do this with clients on an annual basis. I don't do it in between. We look at monthly budgets, and I'll talk more about that later. But every year, I want to look and see, am I making any progress? This is a highly redacted example taken from one of the clients that I've had since 2011. And you can see here, we started out with a few assets, a little bit in the 401k, a little bit in an IRA, but some serious debt, so that the net worth or financial score back in 2011 was $149,700. That is the net worth. That is your total assets minus your liabilities. And again, each of these score sheets is different for each of the clients, but it's very easy to do it. You just have to list all of the assets, your savings, your investments, your residence, anything else you have. And then what are your debts? Do you have a home mortgage? Do you have vehicle notes, credit cards, et cetera, et cetera? And then the assets less liabilities is the net worth. And that this particular client has grown her net worth from a little under 150,000 to 368,000 in a period of about 9 years. So I wouldn't say that's a typical example, but it is a good example of where you can go if you manage your finances on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. And so that's what this presentation is all about. How do you get from 150 to 368 in 10 years? So that's just an example. And I make one of these up for every client, and I would recommend you have something. I wouldn't worry about populating any more often than every year, but certainly every year you ought to take stock of your financial score. Am I making any progress? And you can see year by year, this client is bumping along, and it's working for her. All right, so let's get into the presentation itself. Knowing your financial score. if you talk to the people in the business, the certified financial planners, I've been very familiar with those people and working very closely for them for the last 14 years. I am not a certified financial planner. I'm a pro bono financial advisor. But you will hear them say, well, how do you build wealth? How do you get a tremendous financial score and a good place? And they'll say, it's really pretty easy. There are 5 things you have to do. And here they are. So if you got nothing more out of this presentation, this is what the experts are going to tell you and charge you money for telling you. Okay, 1 is spend less than you make. Now that sounds simple, and it is. It's simple to understand. It is very, very difficult for many people to do. And in fact, we live in a society where with credit cards, with all kinds of things that build a credit score, it is possible, quite possible, to spend more than you make and to do that over an extended period of time. I have clients that were literally spending more than they made for a decade, borrowing more and more and more on credit cards. Well, one of those I met for the first time, and that couple was considering bankruptcy. So it usually ends poorly, but you can do it for a long time. You must spend less than you make, or else you have no margin to save and to invest. Secondly, is to avoid debt. Now, I know people who have never borrowed money to buy a house. There aren't very many of us that do that, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. But that's the only debt that I think people ought to ever consider is debt to buy a house, and then you ought to pay it off as soon as you can and never have a mortgage in the future. But that's the second principle. Just to the extent you can, avoid debt. It is not your friend, despite what you might see in all the TV ads and so forth. Third, of course, comes from those 2. If you spend less than you make, if you avoid going into debt, you can then build liquidity or build savings. The margin goes into savings, later may go into investments, and it builds your net worth. Then we'll talk about setting some long-term financial goals. The process of improving your financial score and becoming wealthy is a long-term process. There is no quick fix. The 5th is to some people counterintuitive, and I'll spend a little time talking about that later, but to give generously and systematically. I just found that there's always somebody that is less fortunate than you. There's always a cause that's greater than yourself, and people who give generously often prosper more. It's counterintuitive, I know. And then the last point comes to the work that I do with clients most of the time. You really have to do it all the time. I mean, you just have to do it month after month, year after year, and over time, you can improve that score and become much more financially. Now, the first concept is you either make more or you spend less, and there are ways of making more. Now, if you've, like me, you're retired, you're on a fixed income, you may have some limitations there, but there are some things that I can do if times got tough to get back into the earning business. But my first one, if you're not retired yet, lifelong learning. There's always things you can do to learn more about their trade or just more knowledge that will help you in your earning capacity. 2 examples. Personally, when I was in my 20s, I had a chance to go back to school and get an MBA degree. I did that while I was working part-time. I went to school 4 nights a week for, I think, 3 years. It seemed like forever. But at the end, I got a master's degree. Things opened up for me that weren't available before that. So lifetime learning, always be learning. There's tremendous ways to do that today with the internet and the library system, all that sort of thing. But as you build your resume, you could always be doing that. My son's a good example of that. He was not a real good student in high school. I could tell you a lot of stories about that, but I won't embarrass him in case he gets online and sees this presentation. But he was not a great student. It's okay. But he was not a book learner. Well, he went to college for a couple of years, studied some trades and things like that, learned how to weld and do some things like that, which later on served him well. And then he went to the police academy, wanted to be a policeman. And he was a policeman for 26 years, a detective in the last few years, and he got into some pretty sophisticated stuff. Then he retired and set up a machine shop. He's a metalworking shop. And he has these plasma cutters, which are CAD CAM machines, computer driven. I said, Jeff, how did you learn all this stuff? It's amazing the things he's doing. He says, well, it's easy. I just go on YouTube. And there's a YouTube demonstration of everything that I do, all this complicated machinery. You can learn how to run it just by going on YouTube. I said, okay, it's really different learning these days, but it's a lifetime thing. Second is dress for success. It's kind of corny, but I think if you look at whatever position you're in and then say, you know, what's the next position up? Can I act like that person in that position? Can I dress in that manner? And that helps. Little things like that help to move you up. And then I have clients that don't like their job, don't like their employer, and so they quit and look for a job. My advice is keep working and looking at the same time, because if you can continuously be employed, continuously earn more than you spend, and continuously save, that really helps. If you lose work and you're out of work and then come back in, sometimes you just have to keep working on a job you don't like real well while you're looking for a better one. And then there's overtime opportunities, especially in a time like today when everybody's looking for people to work. So there's lots of ways to make more. But I think the real payoff for most of us is just spending less. Spending less, and there's lots of ways to do that. In my experience over the last 14 years and 350 clients, there are two really significant places where people get off track, and that's on the home and the cars. So spending money on homes and cars, they're two long-term commitments. You're going to be there for a long time. You're going to have that expense wherever it is for a long time. So you don't really get people in their home, and this is why I think budgeting and tracking is so important, is counting the cost. Some people say, well, I can get a mortgage for less than rent. Well, you know, maybe you can, but mortgage is just a start. You have maintenance, you have the renovations, you have all those things that are going to happen to you when you own a home. And homes are not cheap. It's a lifestyle decision. The bigger home you have, the more maintenance you have, the more your heating bills and cooling bills are going to be. So we downsized to move into a retirement center. We now have 1,100 square feet. We moved from a downsized home already of 2,600 feet. And I told my wife, let's just go through and just, you know, we're just two people. How much space do we really need? And it turned out to be about 1,000 square feet. So we had 1,600 square feet we really didn't use. It's very costly, and it's a long-term proposal. So I counsel people, be really careful in choosing a home, because the bigger and more expensive it gets, the more it's going to drain your resources. And that's a big one for a lot of people. I want to give you an example on cars, and this is kind of near and dear to my heart. If I can get out of this. Yeah. Cars are the second thing where people really run amok. And this is an example that's near and dear to me because it's my own car. So a few years ago, I was able to buy a 2002 Toyota Camry SE, a very nice car, but it already had 94,000 miles on it. You say, well, that's kind of risky, but if you buy a Toyota Camry, it's going to run 200,000 miles, which I did. And the new car price on that car was $29,000. At 94,000 miles, the car's value had shrunk to 8,000, and I paid a little less than that because I bought it for my son-in-law, but he's just a nice guy. But it was worth $8,000. So again, the depreciation over that 94,000 miles was $21,000 or 22 cents per mile. So keep that in mind. That's what I would call acquisition cost. You buy a new car, that's kind of what you're going to look at. And 25 is probably more normal. This was not a totally really expensive car, obviously. After putting 220,000 miles on the car, it was worth $1,500 to me. So the depreciation over that 106,000 miles was $6,500 or 6 cents per mile. So rather than 22, I paid 6. You say, well, is that what kind of a big deal is that? Well, the delta, the difference is 16 cents a mile. And if you're a couple that has 2 cars, you're probably going to drive 24,000 miles a year. That's $3,890. So the difference between buying a new car all the time and buying a used car might be something in the neighborhood of $3,800 for 2 people. Now, if you started at age 35 doing that, and instead of spending this extra $3,800 to buy a new car rather than a good used car, and you bought, let's say, a 401k plan and invested, what would that look like? Well, you put in $3,890 every year, right? And it builds and it builds and it builds. And by the time you're my age, let's see, oh yeah, $1.5 million. So people say, well, how do you get the first $1 million? I say, buy used cars instead of new cars. People don't think about that, but it really is. It makes a huge difference. I mean, I like the new car smell, and I get that, but boy, it is really expensive to have a new car. Now I've messed up the. Okay, vacations. I knew a couple when we were growing up. We had children about the same age, and they went to national parks all the time. I took Disney World vacations. Okay, and I'm lately discovering the national parks. You could have a pretty extensive vacation in a national park, and it costs you a lot less than going to Disney World. I can tell you that. So vacations are another place. Do you really enjoy it? Do you really get the bang for the buck there? That's a way to save some money, and you can do things like national parks that are much, much cheaper. Private versus public schools. I love private schools. I know it's a quality education that if you're not in a great public school district, but boy, the differential here is just amazing. So if you can get into a good public school district, that's a way of saving money. Having a favorite restaurant, going out to eat is almost always 2 or 3 times as expensive as cooking your own and staying in. So restaurants is another place where people really go wild. And if you track that stuff, it's amazing how much you can spend instead of going to the grocery store. So that's another way. He who dies with the most toys wins. Well, how many of us have looked at our garages or our homes or backyards or whatever and said, did we really need that? Did that really give us joy? Was that a need or was that a want? So just taking stock of what you're buying and what you're accumulating. And then the last thing is just delayed gratification, like the car. Instead of buying a new car, can I buy a fixer-upper and run it until I've saved enough money to buy a nicer car? So can I delay gratification? Can I buy it next year rather than this year? All those are ideas of spending less. Debt is not your friend. I know how many people I said, I cannot live without my credit card. I lived for 20 years without a credit card. I now have one credit card, which bothers me because I could no longer rent a car to take a vacation. So I have a credit card to use for renting a car once a year. I mean, it's crazy. A 30-year mortgage, I don't know how we got into that deal. A 30-year mortgage pretty much guarantees you'll never pay off your mortgage and you'll never have that monthly amount to save. Now, a lot of mortgage companies now getting into 15-year mortgages, and I think those are much better. You're much more likely to pay off your home if you have a 15-year mortgage. I'll always have a car payment. Well, buy a car that you have to kind of have a name, save the money, pay yourself the monthly payment instead of the car payment. And people say, well, I bought this for $0 down and 0 interest. Well, you probably could have bought it for less if you just paid cash, because nothing is free. If merchant is going to sell you something at $0 down and 0 interest, he's paying for his money, so he's got to get his profit somehow. You would probably bargain with him and get the price down if you just pay cash. How to save. This is once you develop a margin in your monthly budget and your annual spending, how do you save? The most success I had in my lifetime was just to get the money out of sight. Is there a way that you can, have a payroll deduction that goes directly into a savings account or your 401k and so forth? Just get it out of sight so you don't see it every month. You have less chance of spending it. The gift from the feds is the 401, 403B. That's a great program. Again, if you can get that money coming out of your payroll slip and going into that, it's difficult to get the money back out of it. And it's something the federal government has done for us. It's just really great. If your company has matching funds, that's free money. Boy, take advantage of that. And then count the opportunity cost. I had an example of a wealthy client that came into one of my CFP friends and said, I want to buy a car. Can I afford it? And they said, yeah, well, it's an expensive car. It was, not a big deal. It was like a $50,000 small Mercedes or something. And they said, well, yeah, you got the money, write the check. And he said, wow, I write a check for $50,000. I mean, I could borrow money, get a note. I don't have to pay $500 a month or $800 a month. He said, you have the money to write the check. And he just couldn't do it because it was, $50,000. He said, well, what can I do with that $50,000? If I invested it, I can see that I can earn money. And he couldn't pull the trigger on it. It was really kind of amusing. And then this is a Dave Ramsey thing. Live like no one else, so later you can live like no one else. I think it's just, it's a delayed gratification. Do I have to have everything now, or can I cut back a little bit today, save money, and later on prosper? And then setting long-term goals. There's a story of the tortoise and the hare, and every time I've read that book, the tortoise wins. And again, building wealth is just a long-term process. Steady and slow is what really works. Then compound interest. Once you have saved money and had it start to earn something, this compound interest, I think it was one of the great people, maybe it was Einstein, said it's the eighth wonder of the world. And I have another example of that. If you haven't heard of the rule of 72, let me introduce that to you here with this little chart. The rule of 72 is a way to determine how long it will take to double your money, depending on what kind of a rate of return now you get. Now, in this example, I've used 9.5. If you're invested in the stock market over a long period of time, you might be able to get something close to that in terms of an annual rate of return. And what you do with the rule of 72 is you divide the number 72 by 9.5, and it tells you how long it will take to double. So if I get 9.5% on my money, the rule of 72 says it's going to double every 7.6 years. Now, if I look out to a normal planning horizon of 30 years in the future, again, the tortoise, right? How many times is that money going to double in 30 years? Well, the answer is, and I've manufactured this, so it comes out to be 4 even. If I invest my money, savings, government bonds, whatever, I might get something in the neighborhood of 4 or 5%. That doubles twice in every 2 years. And you say, well, what's the big deal here? Well, it's a huge deal. So investing wisely is another way to build that wealth. For example, if you had $10,000 saved up and you say, okay, I want to invest that, and I'm going to leave it there for the next 30 years, which, if you're in that kind of a age bracket, if you get that kind of a return, it doubles it doubles twice in the 30 years. It would double once, double twice, and you'd end up after 30 years having $40,000. Sounds pretty good. But if you can earn that rate of return in 40 years, you'll have 4 doublings. Well, that's 3 doublings, that's 4 doublings. So 10,000 in 30 years at that rate goes to 160,000. That's not putting any more money in. And that's a real life example. When my son was 22 or 23, got his first job with the police department, he wasn't making much money. And I said, Jeff, you've got to invest in an IRA. At that time, you could put $2,000 a year into an IRA. And he said, I don't have enough money to pay for my truck now. This is crazy. You're talking about saving it. And I said, well, yeah, okay, we'll invest that for you. And so we put $2,000 a year into him for 4 years, and then he had a pension plan of his own, and he was making more money, and I quit. And he never put any more money in that ever. And today, I think that's quite a bit north of 160,000. So it's a real live example. So again, being able to save and set things for the long term is a big deal. Now let me get back to. So the last slide here is the magic of generosity. Giving is a part of, should be a part of the plan. Those who are rich and happy, I found, are people who are generous. It's just, that's the way it works. Sadly, percentage giving is inverse to wealth. People who are not really wealthy are oftentimes more generous than people who have a lot of money. You can always find someone who is less fortunate than you. And I believe the highest level of joy comes not from receiving, but from giving. And then the last thing is do it all the time. And managing your business, because you really do have a business, and doing it on a month by month basis. I'm running a little bit overtime here, Marty, but I want to just introduce you to the mint.com system a little bit, because a lot of people say, well, I'd like to manage my business. I'd like to have monthly plans and track it, but it's really difficult. And I want to show you something that makes it not difficult at all. In fact, very easy. Let me get to the last slide.
Hey, Emerson, you are fine on time. So
Okay.
take as long as you need to talk about Mint and whatever else you want to share.
It will take about 5 or 10 minutes. And then we'll
Oh, yeah. Take your time.
So about 10 years ago, I discovered this product called mint.com, and I want you to just to show you one. The only one I can show you is mine. Oops. No, thank you. I'm in the middle of a presentation. So mint.com is what's called an aggregation software. And if you set up a mint.com account, it's free to the user. You get these pop-up ads, but you can put all of your accounts in one place. And it allows you to go in and look at all your accounts in one format. The overview screen is the first one I usually show, and it just shows you the up-to-date balance. I was in here 2 hours ago, and if you went to your bank, you would see those same balances, but it takes all the accounts that you have and puts them in one place. And then it gives you a transaction register that lists every transaction that goes through any of those accounts. So here are all the accounts that I have. Here are the transactions by date going back. And in fact, I've had this online since December of 2011. So literally every transaction in my financial life is in one place. And then it gives you a description, category for your budget and the amount. Black numbers are money flowing out to other people. Green numbers are coming into me. Now that's a lot of information, but it's not very useful. But here's the payoff of Mint. It allows you to put together a budget of all the income sources you might have and all the spending you might have. And mine's more complex than most people because I'm a nerd. But each of these I tailor to the individual, and all those transactions flow into this report. And so every month I have a budget of $50 for gas and fuel for my car. This month in October, I spent $123. So price of gas is going up, probably a bad budget number. But every item that I spend money on gets tracked every month. And at the end of the month, I have this report. And I can go back to any prior month in this year and see where my money's coming from, where it's going, what my budget was, and what my actual was. I can go back for the entire year and look at that. I can go back to last year. We just got a tremendous amount of information on it. And that's what I do, is help people just set up this. And then it's semi-automatic going forward. Each transaction is captured through your checking accounts, your credit card accounts, whatever, and mashed into this budget report. You don't really do any data entry. The only maintenance you have to do is occasionally MIT will try to find a category to put your money into, and it can't find it. So it'll drop down here, and you have to go back and look at each one of these and say, well, where should that go? Well, I know that one, and my budget is food and dining, groceries. So that'll go back into there. That is health and fitness. That is in my budget, out of pocket, healthcare, and then finally miscellaneous expenses. I don't have any of that. I use a category down here called cash and ATM. So with that, then I've got everything in a category for the month of income and everything in a category for the month in expenses. And it's just a perfect way of keeping track of everything that's going on in your life. You set up budgets for each of these and see how it's tracking. You get green bars if you're doing a great job for the month, red bars if you're going over. So it's a visual sign, and it just tracks it. There's just very little to do. I tell each of my clients, if you'll spend 5 minutes a week just making sure there isn't anything down here and things have been going right, and I spend 20 minutes a month pulling this off into an Excel spreadsheet, analyzing it, sending something out to it. But that's the amount of work involved in it, and it's just a great tool. So I'm going to conclude with that, because what I want to offer is as a follow-on, if you would like to explore this a little bit more, get into mint.com and at least take a look at it and see what it looks like. I would be happy to do that for you. There is my email. Just send an email to me. I would request that you just give me 2 or 3 options for time slots, and let me give you the days. I have office hours available on Tuesdays through Saturdays, 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And I'll go through December 4th on that. So if you'll just send me an email, give me your name, your email address, and phone number, give me 2 or 3 slots that you might be available in that time frame, and I'll get email back to you, confirm a time, and we can do a Zoom call, meet in my office, do whatever you would like. And again, I'm a pro bono advisor. I don't charge my clients anything, so there's no obligation, there's no cost. I just like to help people get started. But if you want to manage your money and build that financial score, this is a beautiful way to get involved and really manage things like you would have a business. And it's very, very helpful. So that's my story. Thanks, Marty.
Thank you, Emerson. And as far as questions are concerned, can you talk about what the downsides of a bad credit score are?
Well, if you have a bad credit score, the biggest downside is you can't borrow money. Now, what I try to get all my clients to is a position where they don't have to borrow money at all. So for me, I don't really care what my credit score is, because I'm not going to borrow any more money. there are some minor irritations. For instance, I could get a slightly lower rate on my car insurance if I had a good credit score. That really bothers me because I pay them cash every month. Okay, but a bad credit score just says you're going to have trouble borrowing money. I tell my clients, get to a place where you don't ever borrow money again. And again, the only place where I think borrowing money is legitimate is to buy a house, and then you ought to pay it off in 15 years and determine, to pay yourself that payment and upgrade rather than buying the next house and going right back into debt. The 30-year loan was devised by people in the mortgage business because that ensured that they would always have business. That's my cynical view.
Wow.
But
Wow.
I think credit scores are just too much emphasized. I like the financial score much better. But there are some downsides. If you need to borrow money, you're going to have trouble if you don't have a good credit score. I don't need to borrow money. Don't want my clients to borrow money, so not an issue.
Do I need another question? Do I need a credit card to build up my credit score?
There are other ways. Obviously, if you have a house and a mortgage, second mortgage, things like that, that will build your credit score. But I think most of the credit score calculations are built on credit card debt, because that's where the banks really make money. So it's pretty difficult. Now it's interesting because my credit score was down in the 600s. I think I never checked it. I didn't borrow any money for the last 9 years. I didn't have a mortgage or anything. So I finally came on a stone wall, and I physically couldn't rent a car without having a credit card. They wouldn't take a debit card. There's reasons for that. So I got a credit card specifically so I could rent a car. And I rented a car and I bought some gas. And within like 3 months, my credit score was like 750. It's crazy, So if you want to build your credit score, get a credit card for, a few months, charge a lot of stuff to it, and your credit score will go crazy. It's just a silly system. It really is.
Wow.
But, that's in the last 25 years, the only place where I have had any trouble using a debit card versus a credit card is renting a car. And before this last spring, actually, when I had to get one, I've always been successful in renting cars with a debit card. But now they're kind of clamping down on that. But other than that, you can do everything with tell people you can do everything with a debit card that you can do with the credit card except one thing, and that is spend money you don't have. With a debit card, you got to have money in the bank or it's gonna bounce on you. Credit card, no limits. So another reason not to have credit cards.
Someone is requesting, Vicky is requesting that you show the debt is not your friend slide again.
There it is. Question about that?
Let me unmute Vicky to see if she has a question about that. Just a sec.
Yeah, she's unmuted.
And I can't figure out how to unmute her. Vicky, can you?
Okay, here you go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I did not have a question. I just didn't see the full slide. So that's why I was asking if you could show it again.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the 30-year mortgage, if you need a mortgage, I recommend going to 15 years. Credit cards, I don't think people ought to have them. It's a perfect way of taking money from rich people and from poor people and giving it to rich people. That's a long story, but it's a plot. And a car payment, I just see people with car payments just dragging them down. It's $300, $400, $500 a month. It keeps going out. It's just a drag. Boy, if you had that money. And again, people buy, I had a client come in here a couple of years ago, and he was terribly in debt, had student loan payments like crazy, he was having trouble making ends meet, although he had a tremendous salary. And I looked and said, well, what's this car? He had two Mercedes. And the total car payment was almost $1,000 a month. And of course I said, well, you got to sell the cars and get some reasonable. And he said, he came back a couple of weeks later and said, no, I can't because I owe more on each of the cars than they're worth. So I got locked in, and it took him, I don't know whether he's still gotten rid of him. He moved out of town, but the car payments are just sink people. It's just awful. And then people get fooled by, there's a deal. Well, I bought this on credit because it was zero down and zero interest. I say, well, if you'd have offered to pay cash, you could have bargained and paid a lot less, because it's the merchant has to pay interest on that money that he's lending you. So he's got to charge more for the product. I mean, just basic economics. So zero down and zero interest is never a good deal.
Gotcha. And a quick question, since I'm off of mute.
Sure.
How do you feel about having all of your personal data in mint.com?
Very good question. Very good question. Mint.com is owned and operated by the Intuit company. They offer the TurboTax, QuickBooks, things like that. It's a big company, and they are very interested in keeping hackers away, obviously. But what I tell people is that if you have a bank account, there is a danger that you will be hacked. I've been hacked 3 times in the last 15 years. I recommend everybody buy identity theft protection insurance for $10 a month. You can get people to work for you to clear all these things out. And I use Commerce Bank, and all 3 occasions they put the money back because it's their responsibility to safekeep my money, not mine. Okay, but it's inconvenient. I think Mint uses the same kind of security software as the banks use, because it would destroy them if anybody ever hacked into Mint. But again, it's possible to do it. But if you've got a bank account, you're going to get hacked. And I think it'd be easier to go directly to a bank than go through Mint. But it's not totally safe. Therefore, I would have identity theft protection, and I would put only my accounts, like my checking account, in the Mint that and I would keep minimal balances in the checking account. Most hacking will occur with transactions, so people get a hold of your information through a transaction. So your bank account, your basic checking account, is the one that's going to get hacked. And I would not keep a lot of money in my checking account. If a few $1,000s is enough, move the rest into a savings account where you don't have transactions going out to vendors. But it's as safe as the banks, but caveat, they could get hacked. So I'm careful on how I set these things up with clients. We don't want any more information in there than we need, but we need to get all the monthly stuff in there. It's a good question.
Okay. Hey, Emerson, can you put your contact slide up again? And I'll just remind everyone that you're available for appointments Tuesday through Saturdays, 9 to 1, excluding the Thanksgiving holiday, through December 4th.
Correct.
Is that correct?
And I could do it in person, meeting in my office. I could also do a Zoom call if that's more convenient for you. So,
okay.
Anyway, glad to do it. It's kind of what I do for fun.
I know I started meeting with Emerson, gosh, has it been like a year and a half ago? And we set up my budget in mint.com. And it has been just such a wonderful, eye-opening experience to see, exactly where my money goes, how I'm spending it. And I feel like I have more control as a result of putting all this information in mint.com. I have more control over my money, and that's an empowering feeling.
Yeah, most people start to make some changes after they see the data. That's a good thing usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your office is? Where is his office?
Oh, Emerson, can you
Yes.
give office address or?
Yeah, my office is at 7600 West 75th Street in Overland Park. 7600 West 75th, Overland Park, 66204. Sorry, I didn't have that on my screen here.
And if you prefer via Zoom, Emerson can send you the link. Just indicate that in the email that you send to him. And as I mentioned, Emerson has done several other programs for us, and he's working on a new program for the spring that I'm excited about. But all those programs can be accessed through our online programs archive. And in the reminder that I sent out for the program today, it includes a link to the personal finance webpage, and on there is a link to the archives. And Vicki has a question. Was a company Franklin Bay mentioned? If so, what was the comment?
No, I didn't. That doesn't ring a bell. It was probably bad diction on my part.
Okay. Any further questions on that, Vicki? You're still unmuted.
Oh, okay. No, I thought Franklin Bay was mentioned or something, so I wasn't sure. Okay.
Okay.
No other questions.
Okay. Well, Emerson, thank you again for this awesome presentation. And I thank you all for joining us this evening. The recording of this program will be available on the online programs archive within about a week. And again, I encourage you to send Emerson an email and set up an appointment so you can get on your way with improving your financial score and achieving financial success. Thanks again, everyone.